Hello, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to this webinar about what's next for parks in California in light of the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Jessica Carter. I'm the Director of Parks and Public Engagement for Save the Redwoods League, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm joining you from the ancestral lands of the Ohlone here in the East Bay area. In my role with the League, I get to help connect people to Redwood Park experiences, which includes collaborating with our partners to improve and expand recreational infrastructure and interpretation in parks, as well as to deliver outreach and education programs. Since you all are participating in the webinar today, I know that all of you have experienced the magic of parks in one way or another. California is rich with them, and they provide the opportunity to engage with nearly every type of natural and cultural landscape imaginable, including, of course, our majestic post-redwood and giant sequoia forests, which exist here alone. What I find truly remarkable about parks is how they can be so many different things to so many different people and communities. And in recent months, we've seen precisely how critical they are to our collective health and well-being in the face of the pandemic. Parks are being duly recognized as an essential service for us all. So today we have an outstanding group of experts you can see on your screen convened to discuss the importance of parks and open spaces, as well as the challenges and opportunities at hand as they reopen to support a public in need. So I'll take a moment to introduce each of our panelists, inviting them to say hello and to share one of their favorite California parks. And I'll start that by pointing out my own background here, which is of the Ben Reese Hike-In Campground at Utno State Park that my family loves to go to each summer. I don't know if it's going to happen this summer, but we've got our fingers crossed. So I'm going to start with Jason DeWall, who is the Northern Field Division Chief for California State Parks. Jason began his state parks career as a ranger in Northern California, and now he oversees the operation of numerous open space and park units in the region, including Coast Redwood and Giant Sequoia parks. So we at the League get to work with him quite often and closely on a wide range of projects. Hello and welcome, Jason.
Hi, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm joining you today from the ancestral lands of the Nisenan. I'm in Folsom, California, but behind me you see MacArthur Burning Falls, which is definitely my favorite state park in the entire system. I will tell you my second favorite is Calaveras Big Trees, just for the redwood theme. But I spent many years up at MacArthur Burning Falls as a supervising ranger and just fell in love with the park and its visitors, and got to know some people on the panel actually at that park. So thank you for having me.
Great, thanks for being here. Next up, we have Robert or Bob Doyle, General Manager of East Bay Regional Park District. Bob leads the largest regional park system in the nation, which includes the much-loved Reinhard Redwood Regional Park in Oakland. And he was an innovator and early champion of the Healthy Parks, Healthy People movement in the San Francisco Bay Area. Hi, Bob, welcome. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Doing this too much.
Got it.
But it doesn't seem to get faster. But I just thank you. Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's a very important time for parks. And I also want to pay my respects to the first peoples of our area, which is the Ohlone people. And this is Black Diamond Coal Mines in our background, a 9,000-acre regional preserve full of people even on a hot day.
Great. Next up, we have Carol Hart, who is a California Coastal Commissioner, former director of Sonoma County Regional Parks, and a current board member of Save the Redwoods League. Carol is a tireless advocate for parks and open spaces, as demonstrated by her appointment by 3 successive governors to the California State Parks and Recreation Commission, among countless other state and regional contributions. So welcome, Carol.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I am speaking to you from Sonoma County, the ancestral area of the Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo. And it is so great to be with everyone today, and I very much look forward to the conversation. Oh, my favorite part. Well, for of this Save the Redwoods League webinar, I'll have to go with Montgomery Woods State Reserve. But I will say, generally, my favorite park is whatever one I'm in. Bob can relate.
Great. Next, I'd like to introduce Laurel Ross, the Vice Chair of the Tribal Council of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria and a Save the Redwoods League counselor. Laurel is a long-standing elected tribal leader who played an integral role in the restoration of the tribe's federal recognition as a sovereign nation and is currently leading the tribe's development of a co-management agreement with Sonoma County Regional Parks for Tule Lake Regional Park. Welcome, Laurel.
Hi, Open Toish. Thank you for having me today. I am in virtual reality with the Muir Woods right now, bringing in some cool, clear clover and some natural light shining through. I'm in my ancestral homeland of my direct ancestors in Sebastopol, and here is on the cusp of the Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo, down the lane away, country mile from Carroll, and pleased to join today. Thank you.
Last but not least, I'll introduce President and CEO of Save the Redwoods League, Sam Hodder. Sam is the enthusiastic leader of the League's centennial vision for redwoods conservation, which includes connecting people to the peace and beauty of California redwoods through a network of magnificent parks and protected areas. So hi there, Sam.
Jessica, and thank you all so much for participating today. I am really excited, making sure I'm not muted.
You're good.
Also calling in from Ohlone Ancestral Land here in the East Bay, and so grateful for all the panelists to participate today. And for my favorite park, I've been in the land conservation business for 28 years now. So my favorite park is the one that we're about to create together. And so for that reason, I picked Alder Creek as my favorite park because that's a property that Save the Redwoods League just acquired this past December, are in the process of working to add into the fabric of public lands where all of us, all Californians and beyond, can enjoy the beauty of where we live. And with Alder right on the cusp of becoming a public resource for all of us to enjoy, I chose the beauty of that spectacular Sequoia Grove.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. As we jump into the questions and dialogue, I want to encourage those watching to participate by using the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. You can type in your questions, and we will see how many we can answer both online and through the panelists. We hope to cover quite a few topics today, so our panelists will aim to keep their individual answers pretty concise, but we hope to cover some territory. And we're going to start out by really setting the stage around the importance of parks and open spaces and the challenges we're currently facing. I'd like to start by talking about what parks and the outdoors mean to people. It was recently reported that when we began sheltering in place, many parks experienced increased visitation, with some of the parks in the San Francisco Bay Area seeing a 400% increase in visitation compared with the same time last year. With so much fear and uncertainty in our communities from COVID-19, can you speak to this increase in visitation and why so many are seeking out California's parks and open spaces? And I'm going to start with Sam and then Laurel on this one, please.
Sure. Well, I think all of us have our own personal experience and have borne witness to the fact that access to the outdoors is fundamental to our sense of health, to our well-being. And we've seen it through COVID-19 as well, how directly access to open space is to public health more generally. And just sharing a personal story, I've been working from home, as many of us have, for the past 9 straight weeks, and looking out over my street, and there's a family that lives up the street that has 2 working parents, fortunately enough, and 3 elementary school age children, and they are going up and down my street 3 or 4 times a day trying to get to the vacated middle school around the corner because their time outside is so fundamental to how they cope with the challenges of sheltering in place, how they're trying to provide for that sense of access, that sense of interest and exercise for their kids during shelter in place as they're struggling to manage home life and work life. And I think we all saw how the public rushed to our parks and open spaces the moment we were asked to shelter in place, and how the intensified use of our public spaces have been front of mind in the narrative about how our community is responding to shelter. So I personally have always seen that connection as a fundamental one to a healthy community, and I think with the challenges of COVID-19, we're seeing that even more broadly, even more with acute resonance, how our access to the outdoors, or the equity that is necessary in our parks to provide for that social benefit, is just fundamental to a healthy community and to our healthy lives.
So picking up from a few of your points, Sam, about access and equity, I think in some ways it's surprising, but then not so surprising to see that the parks saw such a large swell in people responding to go outside to somewhere safe or somewhere that seeking refuge from shelter in place. I think it's important to understand that individual communities throughout experience this pandemic and threats differently based on their realities, whether that's, in more of an urban setting or more of a rural setting. When looking at, the response to some of the more urban park areas in San Francisco, you're really seeing a more diverse group of people able to find shelter and solace in nature. And the fact that so much was being changed in the wake of the pandemic, it wasn't surprising to see usership go up, in part with new users who may have not really been able to find the opportunity or have the access in a way before. I think that's where the pandemic brings a light, an opportunity to really see that maybe even in this threat opened up opportunities for people who otherwise haven't had access to seek that refuge in nature and in all of our parks, which only to me highlights the need for more open spaces and better uses of open spaces and public parks. I know for the Native community, not just my own, but largely throughout California, when talking about this opportunity that was there in terms of increased access, it gave us some concerns because our relationship with state parks, with national parks, with local, regional, and open space, so much of our work is around preservation of stewardship and cultural resources. So that definitely heightened some concern in terms of how that impact would happen. But overall, I think it just highlights an ever-growing need to respond to the diversity of usership in terms of when there's threat and harm, that people will seek solace and protection in the outdoor world.
Thanks, Laurel. And I think we'll come back to several of those themes throughout the course of the afternoon. I'd like to turn to our park agency leaders and ask you, given your respective roles with California State Parks and East Bay Regional Parks, respectively, what did you notice about park visitation throughout the shelter in place? And what are the biggest considerations you have in reopening?
Who wants
So I can go ahead and start.
Great.
What we noticed was the extreme demand, and we heard it from both Laurel and Sam, that the demand for open space was incredibly high. And a lot of people, when you go back, you start to think about the study of recreation, and it's a social science, and we're in a very large kind of social experiment, and we've been able to prove by default how important open space and parks are to the general public and everybody throughout. So we've noticed people coming in that wouldn't normally maybe use our parks in the afternoon because maybe they're with their families at baseball practice, or they've got guitar lessons. But when all of that is taken away, we're seeing families come out and want to hike the trails or bike. And something that kind of goes unnoticed a little bit is the mountain bike sales spiked. They went really, really high because people realized they could go purchase a bicycle for themselves or their children and go recreate in our parks and open space and still practice social distancing. So we noticed a different kind of demand. We've got a new user base that maybe we haven't had in the past, and that demand that has been set through this pandemic, I think we're really going to see more and more in the future, and the visitation's going to continue to go up.
So with the East Bay Regional Parks, we're more than 90% open across the district, and it's been overwhelming numbers. Just have to, accept the challenge of this unprecedented time. And we just got through Memorial Day weekend, traditionally the beginning of summer for everybody, and it's always a huge issue in parks. A lot of people are going to get out for the first time. And the issue now is we're the only game in town. There's no ball fields, there's no games, there's no theater, there's no rock concerts. They're just, it's parks, 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 parks. And one of the things I really want to acknowledge is with Memorial Day, it honors people who have sacrificed and given their lives for this country. And I want to think about those people now, the 100,000 people who have passed away, those souls that are lost during this pandemic. And we have to do everything we can in parks to benefit the people who are suffering, to do our part to do that. And so it's been a huge challenge for my staff, for everyone. But we've had to really focus on behavioral change. It's crowded now. We're not wide open spaces. We're full. And every parking lot, there's a lot of room in the parks, but it's that beginning point of access or traffic where you park. And it's just been really overwhelming. I'm so proud of the Bay Area for adhering to the guidelines. I'm so proud of the park staff everywhere for serving the public like this. But it's really been overwhelming. But also the appreciation that's out there from people is also remarkable. For every complaint we get 5. So happy. A person cried on the phone to me because they were suffering from being in a house for 5 weeks, and they discovered a new access point in a park, and they just said, the emotions are running so high, the depression, the stress, the being locked in place, and so people are really on a very high emotional state, and so we're doing our best to be there for them.
Thanks,
Jessica, if I may, just to add to that, part of the question also was the biggest consideration to reopening, and that is our staff helping educate the public on how to recreate responsibly so that we can keep everybody as safe as we can. And sometimes that means, we're opening in different ways. Like in state parks, we have right now we have increased vehicle access to about 120 of our park units. And with that, we're working with the public to make sure they're recreating safely, so that we don't want to help spread this virus. So that's our number one consideration, is helping people recreate responsibly.
Great. Makes good sense. I want to maybe build on this a little bit, this context setting, and ask Carol, in your coastal commissioner role, what have been the implications of closing beaches, which are, so important and integral to Californians, and how can we use them safely right now? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I am. Thanks. Well, everyone knows that closing the beaches has had a monumental effect. I mean, people in California, they own the beaches. They have a right to access the beaches. And the role of the Coastal Commission is to make sure that access is provided to the beaches of California. And so I think that people have been just so upset that they couldn't get to the beach, and so glad now that they're able to access a lot of the beaches in California. And we're going to talk about environmental justice in a minute, and I think that really goes to the heart of it. There's many wealthy Californians that have houses, maybe some not so wealthy, but many wealthy Californians that have houses on the beach and have been able to access the beaches, whereas people that live in very hot areas inland that really need that access haven't been able to get it during this time. and it just creates such a clear example of inequity. So I think that it's been very difficult for the Coastal Commission, given our role that in ensuring access, but obviously we have a pandemic and we have an emergency, and therefore we've had to work with our park partners to make sure that the beaches are operated in a safe way. Now you're muted, Jessica.
A hazard of this forum. So I think you really set us up for a nice segue into a bit of a discussion. Issues around inequitable access to parks have been really amplified during the pandemic and shelter in place. For example, marginalized communities are typically not within walking distance to an open space, and therefore they're experiencing the pandemic and its negative impacts disproportionately. So as we emerge from this crisis, how do we ensure that we address those equity gaps and engage marginalized communities in enjoying and benefiting from the public lands that belong to all of us? And I think maybe we could start, Carol, since you teed us up so nicely, to talk about that and hear from Bob as well as some of the East Bay Regional Parks work on that front.
Great. Well, when it comes to access and equitable access, I see it as there's three sort of important aspects: engagement, development of parks, new parks, and then access to the parks. But when we're talking about engagement, this is one of the biggest challenges, because we're seeing more and more, and Bob will talk about this, really true in East Bay and also in Sonoma County, more and more people from diverse backgrounds, people of color, accessing the parks and using the parks. But what we don't see, and what's really a struggle, is to get people from diverse backgrounds engaged in park management, as park rangers, as park maintenance, as park interpreters. And until we do, that means that people that come to the parks won't see people that look like them, won't truly feel comfortable and welcome in the parks. So this is something that park managers really need to be on top of. The Coastal Commission adopted environmental justice principles 2 years ago, and Save the Redwoods League has been engaged in training. I think that it's not something that you can just assume you know. It's something that you really have to apply yourself to and make sure that you incorporate that learning as you engage the public. And the second part, in developing parks, it's very easy or somewhat easy to think, well, we'll put a park here or a park there, but that really doesn't work. And actually, gentrification can be a huge problem as you develop parks in areas, that driving out populations that have historically lived in those areas. Really, when you go to develop in a just way to incorporate populations that haven't historically had access to parks, you have to do it from the ground up and engage people to make sure that they're participating and reach out so that everyone has something to say about where the parks are, what the facilities are, and it's all happening together. And then with access, let's just talk about access to the coast for a minute. It's been a historical problem. The commission is working, the Coastal Commission is working with the Conservancy on low cost housing at the coast. That's been identified as a real obstacle. And they found that whether things like hostels, people often want to stay inside. They either can't afford to camp or they don't feel comfortable, which is one low cost way to visit the coast. But I think expanding these sorts of low cost housing in state parks has been a great partner in that regard. I think more and more we have to look at that. And also, of course, the cost of parks. We have to look at both inland parks and coastal parks. If it costs, $20 to go to a park, then you're going to be pushing out a lot of people. So we've begun working on these things, and we need to just, seeing what we're seeing and the need for parks, we really need to be even more serious in our approach.
Well, I agree with everything Carol said, and I also just serving 2 full counties, about 1/3 of the population of the Bay Area. We are very diverse and very urban, and that's the nature of our park system. But what our professional staff is known for a long time is you can't snap your fingers. You have to start with young people, summer jobs, lifeguards, working in a park in the summer, naturalist aides. But we also are doing outreach to multicultural groups We've been doing that for about 15 years, even really intensively. You have to make a real effort. You have to go to those communities, not just be at a visitor center or be in a park. And so I'm really proud of what the district has done. We have Richmond Rangers in a very urbanized community, a tough community in the East Bay. We have a lot of programs through mobile visitor centers that are reaching out, but you really start in schools with school programs. And one of the very hard things now is without schools and without programs in person, our staff has really been incredibly creative. I really ask you to take a look at our website. We've got virtual campground talks. We have virtual interpretive programs. We have creatures in your backyard programs. So the creativity of park staff is just something that's just phenomenal, and it's just part of the culture of problem solving in parks. We deal with people and young people and people of all ages, so we have a very diverse system, and we have a very diverse population, and they've embraced the park district, and those programs are just really important. So environmental education, recreational programs are really important, and that's where you get that youth connection. And then those go to jobs, and then jobs go to permanent jobs. And not everybody that has a summer job in the park, like me, is going to end up a permanent employee, but they gain an appreciation for service, and they gain an appreciation of nature and parks. And that's what we need now more than ever. Frederick Law Olmsted said in the late 1800s that a fundamental moral obligation of any democratic society is to provide parks for urban populations, and particularly in an industrializing nation. That was over 100 years ago that was said. And here we are today dealing with the same exact issue of, as we make cities more dense and we have more density that's needed for homes for people, they don't have parks in the backyard. And one of the things we are lucky in the East Bay is we have a regional trail system, the Bay Trail, the Ridge Trail, the Iron Horse Trail. They touch almost every community in the East Bay. But we really have to recognize as we do planning in the future that we have to provide better access. The conflicts now, much like Muir Woods, much like Mission Peak in our East Bay, are people coming into neighborhoods who don't like the big crowds. And I mean, the people going and creating the big crowds. We're all in this together, and we have to find a path forward of cooperation and behavior and not pit one group against the other. And unfortunately, there's way too much of that happening in the nation right now. And I just really appreciate everybody's cooperating as best they can, because we have to keep people safe. We're keeping our staff safe. They're out there on the front line taking care of these parks for people, and we have to keep people safe. So cooperation and welcoming people of all backgrounds into the parks is a fundamental part of any park agency, and all staff knows that.
Thanks, Carol and Bob. And Bob, I'd like to maybe follow up on that. We've had a really great question from a participant. Part of this is also about the collaboration and coordination across regional, state, and national parks and agencies. And one of our watchers, says that the public need and want calibrated expectations across agencies and organizations and shared boundaries. And I wonder if any of you can speak to that. What you've seen that's gives us reason to hope in recent months, if you have any examples.
Well, I'd like to just start that one off because something very unique happened in the Bay Area, and the Bay Area didn't lower the curve, they crushed it. And I'm so proud again of the Bay Area and the cooperation amongst all parties. Week one, the park directors in the Bay Area met with the health directors. Nobody knows this. It's not, a lot of publicity, but we met every week with the health directors of the counties, the counties around the Bay Area, and our two counties in the East Bay, Alameda and Contra Costa County. And we tried to educate them about parks and park use and how they're managed, and they tried to educate us about the spread of the virus. Like, everybody's so concerned that if you're on a trail and you pass somebody, you're going to be exposed. That's their least concern. The concern they have is groups together talking to each other for 10 minutes or more without a mask. So, having that coordination between the park directors, I think probably everybody saw the page in the Chronicle with the circles around the park, with that distancing. That was all new. But we're now in week 10. We started week 1 looking at how we can adapt because we knew we were going to have more people and we couldn't close the parks. We wanted to be there for them, but we had to operate differently. And the health people are operating from science and medicine, but they don't know how a park is operated. You can't get into an argument with somebody because they sat at a picnic table. You're going to risk people that way. So it has to be behavior and education. And we put PSAs out this last week with all the health departments. I hope people get a chance to see that. It's online here. But it's that coordination that did happen. And I don't know where that happened elsewise, but all the other park directors in the Bay Area were on it day one, trying to figure out the path forward. And it's it's building a plane while you're flying it. And but that coordination happened in the Bay Area, and I'm so pleased that we were able to make a difference in the health, make a difference in the spread, and still keep parks open as best we can.
So I can continue if I may. State parks, we have parks in nearly all 58 counties, and so it became very difficult to track every single county. So taking a regional approach was incredibly important for us, and it still is day to day. So our district superintendents throughout our 21 districts, they may be within several counties, but they've got people assigned to the county emergency operations centers and working with the Department of Health. And then we're also working with, like East Bay Regional Parks and other local park districts and regional park districts, and talking with them on a daily basis. So our district superintendents are talking with their directors or maybe their park managers, along with the county health doctors, to make sure that we are complying with the county health orders, but also being progressive and making sure that we can offer recreational opportunities that are so important to people. And you see the Southern California beaches where in San Diego County, everything is moving very smoothly together. And then maybe we took another approach inland with our reservoirs, where we opened many of our reservoirs at the same time to boating and recreation, and all that was based on a regional approach. And we're constantly moving and adapting as this virus moves and adapts. We have to be nimble every day. So we had to set up an operations center to help support our districts that are working on a regional level, so that we can be in tune with the regional park districts, city park districts within those regions. So that's very, very important. And that's why you haven't seen state parks take a blanket approach across the state, because that wouldn't work in total with a lot of the counties and regional park districts.
Great. Thank you for those examples. I'm going to turn with a question for Laurel now. Indigenous communities have been hit particularly hard by the pandemic, both in terms of higher rates of infection and economically. How are the people of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria faring during this crisis? And can you elaborate? You touched on it in the beginning, but could you elaborate on the role of parks in cultural stewardship and daily well-being for Great and Rancheria, and your related priorities as we emerge from the shelter in place?
Sure. Thank you, Jessica. So a couple of things just to generally comment on is, when talking about the COVID-19, it's important to acknowledge the impact of historical trauma on the health of our community. Disproportionately, we have, a lot of underlying health conditions and compromised immune systems. And research, does demonstrate that trauma, colonization, oppression are all stressors and have adverse effects on health. And, I think for so many of our tribal communities, and certainly within my tribe, members of over 1,400 tribal citizens, when this hit, it was also another wave in addressing an onslaught against our health and welfare. Just as everyone, we all share that. And at this point, it really was a dramatic moment in order to respond to our community with all of the health disparities that do afflict Native communities. And that has been something also with having an elder population. We consider you 60 an elder and above, and we have just under 200 elders, and they are teachers, and their connection to ancestral knowledge. And so that, coupled with trying to look at how we could protect all of our communities, became at the forefront. So for Grayton specifically, as I know with other um, neighboring tribal communities, really mobilizing and how do we best address the immediate protection of our citizens was first and foremost. We've been impacted, in terms of our tribal business and our operations, and being able to really serve our tribal community, which doesn't just include the Grayton Rancheria tribal citizens, but all of Sonoma and Marin counties, and any Native Americans that live in those communities, which is upward to over uh, 15 to 2,000 people. So dramatically, we started seeing a shift in how we could respond, in terms of making sure that protective equipment was made available to households, and ensuring that we maintained communication, which is so critical. And we've learned from wildfires, we've learned from other epidemics and pandemics through time and change. That said, we've been able to stabilize a bit. And of course, like everyone, we turn to look to the parks, because the parks are not just a place for us to recreate. They are part of our sacred knowledge. They're part of our cultural knowing. They're part of our ancestral homeland. This pandemic hit all of us during a time of season shifting into spring, which culturally is a time where all tribes throughout California, and not unique to Grayton, but we're slated to have our annual World Renewal tradition, where we're outside, and we're also bringing in the new seasons. And so that really impacted how we, enter into this new cycle, as everyone did. The significance of that has also impacted how we can gather multi-generation, from having elders and youth, as we turn to try to find some semblance of, I won't say a new normal, but I will say to this change, adjust into this reality. We're transitioning what has been our summer youth programs to virtual summer camps, but with a component where we're able to provide park passes to our families, and to help mitigate any impacts financially for like transportation costs. A lot of public transit systems aren't even up and running, but we've created an online community for the summer for our family and youth to take advantage of open space and parks, to visit these culturally significant places, as well as to share back with the community, with their elders who are often shelter in place. And so for that, it gives me an excitement, because it's really weaving a lot of traditional knowledge with this new technology, which kids get. And also it's teaching us how to really find community throughout another, great wave of change throughout our community. Um, so in terms of, overall, I think we're just feeling our way through all of this as well. Cultural resources for us, cultural sites are intrinsic to parks, and that for the tribe will continue to be a forefront to ensure that there's adequate protections and education through our co-management agreement we have with Sonoma County Regional Parks. We've been in constant communication about the changes that have impacted the local parks. That said, we're working with them to see how we can virtual interpretation opportunities for the school children in the fall as well as in the summer. And I think we're just going to make the best of it as we can, and take comfort that these spaces exist and support us. And so much appreciation to the park staff and to all that are helping bring education and awareness to how to be in a shared space in a different way than what we have traditionally known, but I think it's also important to remark on how important that is from a tribal perspective, is that being in a space in a respectful and right way is predicated on millennia of teaching and cultural knowledge from us. And I hope that we can find ways to continue to intersect and teach that and share that with folks.
Thank you so much, Laurel. And I think that's a great way for us to begin to talk about, what will a park visit look like in the months and potentially years ahead? I know it's very difficult to predict, as we've heard, but especially for you, Bob, and Jason, going forward, how are you and your agencies preparing for this increased demand come summer and the diversity of visitors that we're talking about?
Yeah, I can start. We've learned a few things over the last couple weekends, especially like I talked before about our visitors, educating visitors, both visitors that have been enjoying our parks for years, and now we're seeing a new subset of visitors that maybe wouldn't have gone out, but they didn't have anything else to do, and now they're finding parks, which is fantastic. But it's a lot more labor intensive for us because we are definitely not going to say hands on because we're not, but we are definitely taking a more personal approach with our visitors to educate. So we've even taken our natural resource staff and our cultural resources staff that maybe wouldn't be part of visitor services in the past. We've educated them on helping new visitors to take a good, safe recreation approach coming out to our parks. So we've noticed it's a lot more labor intensive, and that's something that we've even taken all the way to the governor's office, that we're probably spending 30 to 40% more of our time educating the public on safe recreation. But we've also learned, in speaking with National Park Service and Washington State Parks and Oregon State Parks, that when we completely shut down a system the way we have and we're reopening, it's a good way and a good time to start improving behavior of our visitors and changing behavior of our visitors. A quick example would be pack it in, pack it out. That's very tough for us to do in state parks. But now as people are coming out to enjoy the great outdoors, we can talk about pack it in, pack it out, especially with the new user groups that maybe haven't been out before. So it won't be quite as labor intensive on one end. We keep our parks cleaner, and everybody is enjoying state parks and regional parks. And we can use technology. Some of the things that we've been looking at through our operations center is reservations for day use. That's not really something we've done in the past. And if we have reservations for day use, we can limit the impact to our parks, but it also helps people set aside that time to recreate responsibly. We all know that when people make reservations or they plan their trip, in general, they're more responsible, which also helps limit impacts to our parks. And then pay by phone in some of our parking lots where you pay, and premium parking. By premium parking, I mean somebody's paying for 2 hours instead of a whole day. They save a little bit of money, but the turnover is a little bit higher. They come in, they enjoy the park for a couple hours, they leave, and then somebody else comes in as well. So we can handle that turnover and higher visitation rate. So there's lots of little things that we can do, but we've learned a few things over the last few weekends and how much impact that we've had just on the side streets for people wanting to walk in. And we're trying to be as creative as we can, use technology, use education to really help the members of the public that are coming out to enjoy parks recreate responsibly, and we reduce impact.
Well, there's so many things that the details that I could talk about, but I really think first thing I really want to emphasize is we need more parks open. We need more streets closed so people can walk. I really want to compliment Oakland and San Francisco for closing off streets. The parks can't do it by themselves. If everybody in the entire area decides to go to a park, it is impact on resources. It's an impact on staff. If parks are doing a good job, you don't see the person that cleaned the restroom. You don't see the person who emptied the garbage can. You don't see the person who fixed the sign or any of those things because we're doing our job. But when they're overcrowded or the staff is sheltering in place for their own orders to do that with family, people notice it right away, and it's really critical to have the staffing. And I just think parks, national, state, local, are always understaffed. It's the way they're never the highest priority, and it's always been a struggle. But now should be really clear message. They are essential. It's not just recreation, it's health, it's mental health and physical health. We need more resources for parks. This is not a time to cut park budgets. This is the time to give people jobs in parks to help the economy and to be able to keep these parks open for more people, because this isn't going to stop. We're here now. This is the virus isn't going away. So it's really important that there are resources there, so we have these places open and available. When the parks were closed at the beginning, the parks that kept open got everybody else going to them, and that's a big part of the problem. So again, we're all in this together. We've got to figure out a plan to where we manage this in a larger scale, because there's so many people who now are so dependent on parks and have rediscovered or newly discovered parks. They're not going away, and the ball fields aren't going to open up. It's parks. We are the only game in town, and so we need to figure out a way to keep these parks to be available for more people, not less, and to still protect our beautiful resources and native people's lands that we have protected in perpetuity. That's our charge, is protect these places. But we need the help of the public to support keeping parks open and having staff to maintain them. We are stewards, and it's a big challenge right now.
There's actually a great follow-on question that came from one of our participants, just asking, and maybe I would say, 30 seconds each for Jason and Bob. How are you thinking about engaging the power of volunteers to make a positive difference as we begin to reopen parks and open spaces? Are you doing that? How could they play a role?
Yeah, our people know volunteers are the backbone of our department, and we have even just our current volunteer base has been itching to get back and help and be docents in the field, and we've been so fortunate the last couple weekends we've been able to do that. And volunteers are so important to us and the public that we'll keep bringing them on, as many volunteers as we can, because it's going to help. Like I said, everything's been so much more labor intensive. They can help with that and greet the public and show people how to be healthy in our parks.
I think that the number one issue for park managers is to protect the staff and protect the public. And the staff has gone into intensive training on protocols for the safety during the COVID virus. So you don't see that either. We're having protocols in place to clean a restroom differently, to pick up the garbage differently. Are the PPEs there to protect people? And so volunteers are really important, and they really want to help. But we have to keep them safe too, and they don't have the level of training for safety. The last thing we want to do is have a person who loves a park, a volunteer, somehow engage in a way that's not safe. So those things have to be worked out as well. But we have great volunteers throughout the system. But safety's got to be number one, and that takes training, and it takes, we are doing Zoom trainings, of course. We're doing a lot of HR training to get people at all levels to understand how to be safe. But this is unprecedented. Both the sadness and fear, a lot of fear and anxiety at the same on both sides, users and staff, and to manage through that has been a challenge. So we're learning a lot, but we're managing in real time.
Great, thank you. I want to ask Sam a question now, sort of a different track. Is it possible to grow park capacity and advance associated conservation efforts while also simultaneously addressing the significant economic challenges we're facing in California and across the country? What are your thoughts there? Just a small question.
Yeah, it's a small little question, and I think Bob touched on it a minute ago as well. And thinking about where we go from here. I mean, what we've highlighted is kind of a collision between a growing public need for access to open space and an increasing audience of people for whom parks are fundamental to their health, and an increasing demand on limited staff capacity, limited kind of budgetary capacity of our park providers that are providing this extraordinary public service on a shoestring. So I think it's important for us to think about the incredible opportunity that collision brings together in terms of a green economy. And as we think about stimulating our economy, as we think about getting the young generation back to work again, for example, and we think about the infrastructure needs of our parks, so if we think about the restoration needs of our natural lands and our working lands, there is an incredible combination of opportunity of bringing a green economy that both addresses park equity by building new parks, by bringing parks up to speed and up to current expectations, supporting park staff with real investment, and in climate resilience, building, addressing the forest ecology situation of making sure that our forests are fire resilient, that our rural landscapes are protected, that our communities are ready for the change that's coming, and that our parks are ready for the people that need them. So I think it's really important for us to look back at the precedent that was set in the past. Some of our greatest public investments in our shared outdoor resources happened in times of economic crisis. East Bay Regional Park District itself came into being during the Great Depression. And we think about the impact that the WPA and the CCC, two Depression-era programs about putting a whole generation back to work, had on building the infrastructure and restoring the landscapes of our park systems. It was part of what brought our country out of the Depression. So I think collectively we need to think about and we need to convey to our decision makers at both the state and federal level the opportunity to bring investments in our parks and open spaces together with economic recovery, and invest in our public health, invest in our parks, and invest in our communities by creating a green economy.
And Jessica, just if I can, most people look at parks, they look at the park rangers, park police, park maintenance, and say, oh, there's a few people there because they're never, state park still hasn't recovered from the recession on their base budget for operation. But parks are always struggling. William Penn Mott called it getting money for your park, squeezing water out of rocks. And any park person knows that quote. But people forget that there are lots of mom and pop small businesses that are the concessionaires, the store, the boat rental, the fish dock. All of those people are getting jobs from parks. They're not park employees, they're small businesses. They also forget that construction jobs in parks, we just built a new marsh in Bay Point in the East Bay with new public access, new restroom. 200 jobs by contractors, not park staff, were created out of that one project. So there are big construction jobs in parks. You build a bridge in a park, it's probably $500,000 to $1 million now if you're replacing a bridge. You replace a sewer line or a water line. These things are employment rich, and we only count the people who work in the parks who are so essential. We don't count the contractors that are building trails and parks and restrooms and construction jobs in the parks. It's really a huge multiplier for jobs, and it's a great way to restart the economy again. They're safe, they're important, and they're needed.
Thank you both. I think that really helps us see a path to the future that is optimistic and rooted in green economy and all of the things that I know each of you here have been really passionate about for your careers. And it's hard to believe, but we are getting close to 5 o'clock right now. So I want to end with a question, and I'm seeing some themes on this running through the Q&A on Zoom that really helps to share how all of us participating today, the park supporters, what we can do right now to help strengthen our parks and open spaces. One aspect obviously is encouraging visitors to adhere to safety protocols. And we've talked about that, and folks can see what those are by Googling any of the parks, but also we will have some resources attached to our blog and following this that Bob had referred to. Yes, PSAs and the like. So absolutely, that's one aspect of how we can all support our parks. But another is around budget and funding, and parks are facing, the state is facing a massive deficit right now, and parks are facing budget cuts. So, what can park supporters do to turn the tide and make sure that we're able to realize all of this great vision that was just spoken to? I'm going to start. I might start with Carol, and then we'll go to Sam. And I'm starting with you two, especially because I know that our state parks partners, like Jason, cannot comment on things like state bond measures and the like. So, we want to hear some other commentary about that aspect specifically. And you're muted, Carol.
I just want to say how much power that we have. I mean, I've been out of, working on the outside in academia. Then I was a park manager. Now I'm again part of the public. And I have found that park managers are so occupied with actually running the parks. It's the people that are outside, all of us, that really need to step up, because originally, how did the state parks system get established? It was people who put together a bond act in 1928 that and worked to fund and identify key parks that needed to be acquired on the coast, the redwoods. I mean, we have the power. We have the power to vote. We have the power to lobby. We have the power to partner and even manage parks. In the recession, people stepped up. They joined nonprofits like LandPass, like Save the Redwoods League, and help manage parks for state parks. I just think you have to look inside yourself as a viewer of this webinar and say, what can I do to support parks? And you can do so much. And I think that's really the message beyond vote, vote, vote. So I think Sam will talk about getting the bonds that are the bond and what's going on at the federal level. But I just really want to emphasize that power that we all have.
Yeah, and I'll only add a little bit to that. I think we've all learned so much from the participants in this call about the role that parks play. And I think pulling the veil back a little bit on what goes into all of our park experience, the people hours, the incredible stewardship and the obligation of the agencies that are managing our parks and making sure that they stay open and that we as users stay safe, and that they're thinking about ways to make that access more equitable to a broader audience of stakeholders and address the cultural restoration and the cultural protection that's so fundamental to the indigenous people in California. I think that understanding that deeper awareness, thinking about the broader complexity of what it means to have a park system that keeps us safe, that keeps us healthy, really serves to deepen our shared sense of stewardship and our shared responsibility to do exactly what Carol's talking about. Pay attention, stand up and be engaged. Recognize that right now in Washington, D.C., the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is absolutely fundamental to our federal agency partners' ability to protect land and to provide park resources, there's a moment of opportunity for Land and Water Conservation Fund to be permanently reauthorized and fully funded. So keep an eye on Save the Redwoods League websites and those of our partners who are putting out information about what's happening at the legislative level, both at the state and national level. And be ready to engage and be informed. And even as you're following best practices on how to behave safely in the parks, and you're bringing a new love and appreciation for the agency people that are doing the hard work behind the scenes to keep those parks open for us, you're thinking about how you can engage in the public forum to advance the kind of investment that is going to make those parks stay safe for us when we're going to need them most. And we're going to need them. The parks are going to be fundamental to our collective recovery as a society in the years ahead, and we need them. We need to be investing in those parks now, because again, the role that they're going to play in our resilience and in our healing after this crisis is going to be front and center.
If you want to support something that's truly a bipartisan effort right now, which is very rare these days, the Land and Water Conservation Fund is active. It's queued up in Washington. It's got bipartisan support. It's scheduled, I think, in a week or two to be voted on in the Senate. It's a fundamental. Almost all the national, state, and local parks have received at one point or another Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's not a new tax. It comes from offshore oil. It's a mitigation, really critical. And there is a bill in the Assembly, AB 3256 by Eduardo Garcia, who sponsored Prop 68. It's really going to come down to the public saying now is not a time to cut back on parks. We know how difficult things are. We know how bad the economy is, but we need these parks, and we really do. And now's the time.
Well, on that note, we are at the 5 o'clock hour, and I think I'll just quickly reiterate some of the messages from today's webinar. Parks are absolutely an essential service, and they are part of the critical infrastructure in California for all of our communities. Many of us have worked together to protect and promote these special places in the past, and we still clearly have work to do on this front, from park managers and supporting partners to the visiting public. So your continued advocacy is invited. And I just want to thank everyone, all of our panelists, so much for joining the webinar today and sharing your different perspectives and suggestions and insights onto everything that is going on currently and everything that the future holds. And as I mentioned, also, there will be a recording of this webinar and other related resources, like the PSAs from East Bay Regional Parks, on our, we'll have it on our blog and in social media in just a couple of days. On that note, wishing everyone good health, and hopefully we'll see you out on the trails sometime soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Save the
Thank
red
you.
light.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Bob. Great conversation.